The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan village as Sergeant Maria Santos checked her gear one final time. Her squad of 8 soldiers prepared for what intelligence reports called a routine patrol through the Helmand province. The air was thick with tension, though none of them spoke about the growing unease that had settled over their forward operating base in recent weeks. Maria had joined the army 5 years earlier, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that women could excel in combat roles. At 26, she had already earned the respect of her fellow soldiers through her quick thinking and unwavering courage under pressure. Her commanding officer, Captain James Mitchell, had specifically requested her for his unit after hearing about her exceptional performance during training exercises. Captain Mitchell was a veteran of 3 deployments, known for his careful planning and genuine care for his troops. The men and women under his command trusted him completely, knowing he would never put them in unnecessary danger. That morning, as they prepared to move out, he gathered the squad for a final briefing about their mission to check on local villages and gather intelligence about insurgent activity in the area. The patrol began like countless others before it. They moved through narrow dirt roads, past adobe houses where curious children peered from doorways and elderly men watched with cautious eyes. The landscape was deceptively peaceful, with rolling hills dotted with sparse vegetation and the occasional goat herder tending his flock. But Maria knew that danger could emerge from anywhere in this unforgiving terrain. As they approached the 3rd village on their route, something felt different. The usual sounds of daily life were absent. No children played in the streets, no women hung laundry to dry, and even the animals seemed to have disappeared. Captain Mitchell raised his hand, signaling the squad to halt and take defensive positions behind a low stone wall that bordered the village entrance. Through her binoculars, Maria scanned the rooftops and windows of the buildings ahead. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant sound of wind whistling through the mountains. She had learned to trust her instincts during her time in Afghanistan, and every fiber of her being screamed that they were walking into a trap. She caught Captain Mitchell's eye and saw that he shared her concerns. The captain made the decision to proceed with extreme caution, knowing that abandoning the mission without gathering intelligence would only mean another squad would have to return later. He divided his team into 2 groups, with Maria leading 3 soldiers around the left flank while he took the remaining 4 through the center of the village. They would maintain radio contact and retreat immediately if they encountered any hostility. As Maria's team moved carefully through the narrow alleyways, she noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt and shell casings scattered near a well. These were clear signs that insurgents had been in the area recently, possibly within the last 24 hours. She reported her findings to Captain Mitchell, who acknowledged and continued advancing toward the village center, where intelligence suggested they might find information about a weapons cache. The attack came without warning, just as Maria's team reached the far edge of the village. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles erupted from multiple directions, followed immediately by the deeper boom of rocket-propelled grenades. Maria threw herself behind a concrete barrier as bullets whined overhead and chunks of masonry exploded around her. Through her radio, she could hear Captain Mitchell shouting orders to his team as they came under heavy fire from insurgents positioned in the buildings surrounding the village square. Maria quickly assessed her team's situation and realized they were in a relatively protected position compared to the captain's group, who had walked directly into the kill zone that insurgents had carefully prepared. She could hear the desperation in Mitchell's voice as he called for immediate backup and medical assistance. One of his soldiers had already been wounded, and they were pinned down with no clear escape route as enemy fighters closed in on their position. Without hesitation, Maria made the decision that would define her military career and earn her a place in the annals of military history. She ordered her 3 soldiers to provide covering fire and began planning a rescue mission that would require her to cross 200 meters of open ground under intense enemy fire. The odds were against her, but she knew that Captain Mitchell and his team would die if someone didn't act immediately to save them. Maria's mind raced as she calculated the impossible odds facing her. The insurgents had positioned themselves in a perfect ambush formation, with machine gun nests covering every possible approach to where Captain Mitchell's team was trapped. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, and the volume of incoming fire suggested they were facing a well-coordinated force of 15 to 20 fighters. Through her radio, She heard Private Johnson cry out as he took shrapnel to his leg from a grenade explosion. Captain Mitchell's voice remained steady despite the chaos, but Maria could detect the underlying strain as he tried to coordinate his team's defense while treating the wounded soldier. The enemy fire was so intense that any movement in their position drew immediate attention from multiple shooters. Maria called for air support, knowing it would take at least 20 minutes for helicopters to reach their remote location. She also requested artillery assistance, but the danger of hitting friendly forces made that option nearly impossible, given how close the enemy positions were to her trapped comrades. The brutal reality was that Captain Mitchell's team had perhaps 10 minutes before the insurgents would overrun their position entirely. Corporal Davis, one of Maria's team members, grabbed her arm as she prepared to move. He had served 2 previous deployments and understood combat tactics better than most soldiers his age. He told her that attempting a rescue across open ground would be suicide, and that their best option was to wait for reinforcements while providing what covering fire they could from their current position. Maria appreciated his concern, but she had already made her decision. She explained her plan to her 3 soldiers, knowing that success would depend entirely on their ability to create enough distraction to give her a chance to reach the captain's position. They would need to coordinate their fire with precision timing, creating the illusion of a larger force attacking from multiple directions. She studied the terrain between her position and where Captain Mitchell was trapped, memorizing every piece of cover she could use during her sprint across the killing zone. There was a drainage ditch that ran about halfway across the open area, offering concealment for perhaps 50 meters. Beyond that, she would have to rely on speed and the element of surprise to cover the remaining distance. The key to her plan was an abandoned pickup truck that sat roughly 30 meters from Captain Mitchell's position. If she could reach that vehicle, she would have solid cover and a better angle to suppress the enemy fighters who were keeping her commander pinned down. From there, she could potentially create an escape route for the entire team. Maria shed her heavy equipment, keeping only her rifle, ammunition, and medical supplies. Every extra pound would slow her down during the most dangerous sprint of her life. She synchronized her watch with her team members and gave them final instructions about when to begin their diversionary fire. The success of the entire mission would depend on split-second timing. As she prepared to begin her run, Maria thought briefly about her family back home in Texas. Her parents had worried constantly since her deployment began, and her younger brother had begged her to request a transfer to a safer position. She had always told them that she could handle whatever the Army asked of her, but now she faced a situation that would test every skill she had learned during years of training. Captain Mitchell's voice crackled through her radio headset, reporting that Private Johnson's condition was worsening and that enemy fighters were beginning to move closer to their position. She could hear the distinctive sound of insurgents communicating with each other in Pashto, indicating they were coordinating an assault that would overwhelm the trapped Americans within minutes. Maria took 3 deep breaths to steady her nerves and checked her rifle one final time. She had always been an excellent marksman, scoring in the top 5% during qualification tests, but shooting accurately while running at full speed under enemy fire would require skills she had never been forced to use in actual combat situations. The moment arrived faster than she expected. She gave the signal to her team, and immediately heard the sharp crack of their rifles as they began laying down covering fire on the insurgent positions. The enemy fighters instinctively ducked for cover and returned fire toward the new threat, giving Maria the precious seconds she needed to begin her desperate dash across the open ground. Her first 50 meters went better than expected, as the drainage ditch provided excellent concealment, and the insurgents had not yet realized that a single soldier was attempting to reach their trapped comrades. She could hear bullets whistling overhead, but most of the enemy fire was still directed at her team's position rather than at her movement through the terrain. Everything changed when she emerged from the ditch and began the most exposed portion of her run. An insurgent fighter spotted her immediately and began shouting warnings to his comrades while directing accurate rifle fire in her direction. Maria zigzagged desperately as bullets kicked up dust clouds around her feet and ricocheted off rocks with terrifying metallic screams. The world seemed to slow down as Maria sprinted through the gauntlet of enemy fire. She could feel the heat of bullets passing inches from her body and hear the angry buzz of rounds that came too close for comfort. Her training kicked in automatically, causing her to vary her speed and direction in unpredictable patterns that made her a more difficult target for the insurgent marksman. A machine gun position opened up from her left flank, sending a stream of tracer rounds that lit up the dusty air like deadly fireworks. Maria dove forward, rolling behind a large boulder just as the heavy bullets chewed up the ground where she had been running. She could hear the insurgents shouting to each other, trying to coordinate their fire to prevent her from reaching the abandoned pickup truck. From her temporary shelter, Maria could see Captain Mitchell's position more clearly. The captain and his 3 remaining soldiers were crammed behind a low wall that provided minimal protection from the increasing enemy fire. Private Johnson lay motionless, and Maria couldn't tell if he was unconscious or worse. Sergeant Williams was pressing a field dressing against a wound in his shoulder, while still returning fire with his rifle. The insurgents had positioned themselves brilliantly, using the village buildings to create interlocking fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. Maria counted at least 8 separate muzzle flashes from different positions, confirming her earlier estimate that they were facing a substantial enemy force that had been planning this ambush for some time. She knew that her 3-person team was running low on ammunition and couldn't maintain their diversionary fire much longer. Already she could hear the rate of their shooting beginning to slow, which would give the insurgents more freedom to focus their attention on her rescue attempt. Time was running out for everyone involved in this deadly game of survival. Maria made a quick calculation and realized she had enough distance to throw a smoke grenade. That would obscure the final 30 meters to the pickup truck. The gray smoke would provide concealment, but it would also alert every enemy fighter to her exact location and intentions. It was a desperate gamble that could either save her life or ensure her death. She pulled the pin from her smoke grenade and hurled it as far as possible toward her objective. The canister bounced twice before beginning to emit thick gray clouds that drifted across the battlefield. Almost immediately, the insurgent fire intensified as fighters directed their weapons toward the expanding smoke screen, hoping to hit her even if they couldn't see her exact position. Maria burst from her rocky shelter at full speed, running directly into the gray cloud that burned her lungs and made her eyes water. She could hear bullets cracking past her head and feel the shock waves from near misses, but the smoke made it impossible for the enemy to aim accurately. She stumbled once on uneven ground but recovered quickly and continued her desperate charge toward the truck. The pickup appeared suddenly through the smoke like a metallic island of safety in an ocean of chaos. Maria slammed into the vehicle's rear bumper with enough force to knock the wind from her lungs, but she immediately rolled around to the engine block, which would provide the best protection from incoming rifle fire. The truck's previous owners had reinforced the doors with metal plates, suggesting it had been used by insurgents before being abandoned. From her new position, Maria had a much better view of the tactical situation and could see why Captain Mitchell's team was in such desperate trouble. The insurgents had set up a classic L-shaped ambush with machine gun positions, covering both flanks and riflemen positioned to prevent any escape to the rear. It was a textbook example of guerrilla warfare tactics designed to annihilate a small unit. Maria began engaging the nearest enemy position with carefully aimed shots, using her superior marksmanship training to maximum advantage. Her first target was a machine gunner who had been pouring devastating fire into Captain Mitchell's position. She controlled her breathing, aimed carefully despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, and squeezed the trigger smoothly. The insurgent fighter toppled backward, and his machine gun fell silent for several precious seconds before another fighter took over the weapon. Those few seconds allowed Captain Mitchell to move Private Johnson to better cover, and for Sergeant Williams to treat his own wound more effectively. Maria had succeeded in buying them time, but she was now the primary target for every enemy fighter in the village. Bullets began striking the truck from multiple directions, creating a deadly symphony of metallic impacts and shattering glass. Maria kept low and continued firing at any insurgent position she could identify, trying to suppress their fire long enough for Captain Mitchell to organize an escape attempt. She knew her ammunition wouldn't last forever, and the enemy was beginning to coordinate their movement to flank her position. Through her radio, she could hear Captain Mitchell calling her call sign and asking for her status report. His voice carried a mixture of gratitude and concern, as he realized that one of his soldiers had risked everything to come to their aid. Maria responded that she was in position and ready to provide covering fire, but that they needed to move immediately before the insurgents could surround her location completely. The captain acknowledged her transmission and began preparing his team for a fighting Withdrawal to her position. Private Johnson was barely conscious but able to move with assistance, while Sergeant Williams had managed to stop the bleeding from his shoulder wound. The fourth member of their team, Corporal Peterson, had been conserving his ammunition and was ready to provide covering fire during their movement. Maria watched through her rifle scope as Captain Mitchell's team prepared to make their move across 15 meters of open ground that separated their position from the pickup truck where she waited. The next 60 seconds would determine whether Maria's desperate rescue attempt would succeed or result in the deaths of everyone involved. She could see Captain Mitchell organizing his team for their sprint to her position, with Corporal Peterson preparing to carry the wounded Private Johnson while Sergeant Williams provided covering fire despite his own injury. Maria identified the three most dangerous enemy positions that could target the captain's team during their movement. Two insurgent fighters had positioned themselves in second-story windows with excellent fields of fire, while a third had taken cover behind a stone wall with a clear line of sight to the route Captain Mitchell would have to take. She would need to suppress all three positions simultaneously to give her comrades any chance of survival. She switched her rifle to semi-automatic mode and began a systematic engagement of each target, firing 2 quick shots at each position before moving to the next. Her accuracy was remarkable under such stressful conditions, forcing the insurgents to duck for cover just as Captain Mitchell's team began their desperate dash toward her location. The captain had decided to move his team in a single group rather than trying to cross individually, reasoning that concentrated covering fire would be more effective than spreading their movement over a longer period. Corporal Peterson half-carried, half-dragged Private Johnson while the captain and Sergeant Williams laid down suppressing fire on their flanks. Maria's heart pounded as she watched her commanding officer sprint directly through a crossfire that should have been impossible to survive. Enemy bullets kicked up dust clouds around the running soldiers and sparked off rocks with metallic screams. But somehow the entire team managed to reach the pickup truck without taking additional casualties. Captain Mitchell slid behind the truck's front wheel well, breathing heavily, but immediately taking stock of his team's condition and ammunition status. Private Johnson was drifting in and out of consciousness, but was stable enough to continue fighting if necessary. Sergeant Williams had lost some blood but remained effective, and Corporal Peterson was uninjured and ready for whatever came next. The insurgents quickly realized that the American soldiers had consolidated their position and began adjusting their tactics accordingly. Instead of continuing their unfocused fire, they started maneuvering to surround the pickup truck from multiple directions. Maria could see fighters moving through the village buildings, using doorways and windows to advance while staying under cover. Through her radio, Maria contacted her 3-person team and learned that they were running critically low on ammunition after providing covering fire for the rescue. They had perhaps 2 magazines each remaining, which would only last a few more minutes in a sustained firefight. The situation was becoming more desperate with each passing moment. Captain Mitchell assessed their tactical situation and realized they had temporarily improved their position but were still vastly outnumbered and surrounded. The pickup truck provided good cover from small arms fire, but they would be vulnerable to grenades if the insurgents could get close enough. Their best hope remained the arrival of air support, but the helicopters were still 15 minutes away. The enemy fighters seemed to understand the Americans' predicament and began preparing for a coordinated assault from 3 directions. Maria could see them communicating with hand signals and positioning themselves for what appeared to be a final push to overrun the American position. She counted at least 12 insurgents visible from her vantage point, with probably more hidden in buildings throughout the village. Maria made a decision that surprised even her experienced commanding officer. She proposed leaving the relative safety of their defensive position to launch a counterattack against the insurgents' main position. Her reasoning was that the enemy would not expect such an aggressive move from a small surrounded force, and that taking the initiative might disrupt their planned assault. Captain Mitchell initially rejected the idea as too risky, but Maria pointed out that staying in their current position would only delay the inevitable. The insurgents had time, numbers, and position on their side, while the Americans had limited ammunition and no secure escape route. A bold offensive action might be their only chance to survive until air support arrived. The captain listened to her tactical assessment and realized she was right about their limited options. Staying defensive would almost certainly result in their deaths when the insurgents launched their coordinated attack. At least by taking offensive action, they could choose the time and direction of engagement rather than simply reacting to enemy movements. Maria outlined her plan quickly but thoroughly. She would take Corporal Peterson and assault the main insurgent position in the village center, using grenades and aggressive rifle fire to create maximum chaos and confusion. Meanwhile, Captain Mitchell and Sergeant Williams would provide supporting fire from the truck while protecting Private Johnson, who was in no condition to participate in a mobile assault. The success of the plan would depend on speed, surprise, and Maria's ability to identify and neutralize the insurgent leaders who were coordinating the attack against their position. If she could eliminate the key organizers, the remaining fighters might lose their coordination and become easier targets for the supporting helicopter gunships when they finally arrived. Captain Mitchell gave his approval for the counterattack, knowing it represented their best chance for survival in an impossible situation. He had complete confidence in Maria's tactical abilities and her marksmanship skills, both of which had already been proven during her rescue of his team. If anyone could pull off such a desperate gamble, it would be the sergeant who had already risked everything to save his life. Maria checked her equipment one final time and prepared for what would be the most dangerous assault of her military career. She had 4 grenades remaining, 3 full magazines of ammunition, and the unwavering determination to ensure that every member of her team would survive this engagement. The insurgents had made one critical mistake in their planning. They had underestimated the courage and capabilities of the American soldiers they were fighting. The counterattack began with a level of violence and precision that caught the insurgents completely off guard. Maria and Corporal Peterson emerged from behind the pickup truck like unleashed fury, moving in perfect coordination toward the enemy's main position, while Captain Mitchell and Sergeant Williams provided devastating covering fire from their defensive position. Maria's first grenade landed exactly where she intended, exploding in the doorway of a building where 3 insurgent fighters had been preparing to launch their own assault. The blast eliminated the immediate threat and created a cloud of dust and debris that concealed her movement as she sprinted toward the next objective. Corporal Peterson proved to be an ideal partner for the assault, matching Maria's aggressive pace while maintaining accurate fire on enemy positions. His combat experience from previous deployments showed as he instinctively knew when to move, when to take cover, and how to coordinate his actions with Maria's. Without needing constant communication, the insurgents found themselves facing a tactical nightmare as the 2 American soldiers seemed to appear from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria's understanding of urban combat techniques allowed her to use the village's narrow alleyways and building corners to maximum advantage, striking at enemy positions from unexpected angles before disappearing again. Her second grenade destroyed a machine gun position that had been causing significant problems for her team throughout the engagement. The explosion not only eliminated the weapon, but also demoralized several nearby fighters who had believed themselves to be in secure positions. Maria could see some of the insurgents beginning to retreat toward the far edge of the village. As she advanced through the village center, Maria encountered an insurgent leader who was shouting orders in Pashto while pointing toward the American positions. She recognized him as a high-value target based on his equipment and the deference other fighters showed him. Without hesitation, she engaged him with precise rifle fire that ended his ability to coordinate the enemy's defensive efforts. The loss of their leader created visible confusion among the remaining insurgent fighters. Some continued firing at the pickup truck where Captain Mitchell was positioned, while others tried to engage Maria and Corporal Peterson directly. The lack of coordination made them vulnerable to the aggressive assault tactics that Maria had learned during her advanced infantry training. Corporal Peterson flanked a group of 3 insurgents who had taken cover behind a low wall, using his superior training and equipment to eliminate the threat before they could react effectively. His actions cleared a key position that had been preventing their advance toward the village's main square, where several enemy fighters were still maintaining organized resistance. Maria's third grenade landed among a cluster of insurgents who had been firing from the roof of a 2-story building. The explosion not only neutralized the immediate threat, but also caused structural damage that forced other fighters to abandon their elevated positions. The psychological impact of the blast was as important as its physical effects. Through her radio, Maria could hear the distant sound of approaching helicopters, indicating that air support was finally within range of their position. The knowledge that help was coming gave her additional confidence to press the assault even more aggressively, knowing that she only needed to maintain pressure on the enemy for a few more minutes. The remaining insurgent fighters found themselves caught between the advancing American ground forces and the approaching helicopter gunships. Several of them attempted to flee the village entirely, while others tried to find better defensive positions that would protect them from both ground assault and aerial attack. Maria used her final grenade to destroy a defensive position where 4 insurgents had established a strong point with overlapping fields of fire. The explosion created enough chaos to allow her and Corporal Peterson to advance to within 50 meters of the village center, where they could dominate the remaining enemy positions with direct rifle fire. Captain Mitchell's covering fire from the pickup truck had been precisely timed to support each phase of Maria's assault. His experience as a combat leader showed as he instinctively knew when to intensify his fire to suppress enemy positions and when to shift targets to support his advancing soldiers. Even Sergeant Williams, despite his wound, contributed accurate shooting that kept several insurgents pinned down. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as 2 Apache gunships approached the village from different directions. The pilots had been briefed on the Americans' positions and were prepared to provide close air support that would eliminate any remaining threats. Maria marked her team's location with colored smoke to ensure the pilots could identify friendly forces. The insurgents recognized that their tactical situation had become hopeless with the arrival of helicopter gunships. Those who were still capable of movement began withdrawing toward prepared escape routes that led into the surrounding mountains. Several fighters who had been wounded during Maria's assault were unable to retreat and remained in their positions. Maria and Corporal Peterson reached a position where they could see the entire village layout and confirmed that the main enemy force had been neutralized or dispersed. The counterattack had succeeded beyond their most optimistic expectations, transforming what should have been certain death into a tactical victory against overwhelming odds. As the Apache helicopters began their attack runs on the fleeing insurgents, Maria signaled for Corporal Peterson to begin their withdrawal back to the pickup truck where the rest of their team was waiting. They had accomplished their mission of disrupting the enemy assault and buying time for air support to arrive, but they still needed to consolidate their position and prepare for potential medical evacuation. The entire engagement had lasted less than 2 hours, but it had tested every skill that Maria had learned during her military career and pushed her beyond limits she had never imagined she could exceed. The Apache helicopter's arrival marked the beginning of the end for the insurgent forces that had planned such a carefully coordinated ambush. The gunship's thermal imaging systems tracked the fleeing fighters through the mountainous terrain, eliminating those who posed continued threats while the pilots maintained constant communication with Maria's ground team to ensure no friendly fire incidents occurred. Maria and Corporal Peterson successfully withdrew to the pickup truck, where they found Captain Mitchell treating Private Johnson's wounds with greater success now that the immediate combat pressure had been relieved. Sergeant Williams had managed to stop the bleeding from his shoulder completely and was already preparing to assist with security as medical evacuation helicopters approached their position. The village fell completely silent except for the sound of helicopter rotors and the crackling of small fires that had been started during the engagement. Maria took a moment to survey the area where she had conducted her desperate rescue mission, hardly believing that she had successfully crossed that deadly open ground under such intense enemy fire just 2 hours earlier. Captain Mitchell approached her with an expression that mixed profound gratitude with professional respect. He had witnessed countless acts of courage during his 3 combat deployments, but Maria's decision to risk everything for her trapped comrades represented something exceptional even by military standards. Her actions had saved not only his life but the lives of 3 other soldiers who would have certainly died without her intervention. The medical evacuation helicopters landed in a clearing just outside the village, bringing flight medics who immediately began treating Private Johnson and Sergeant Williams. Both soldiers were stable and would make full recoveries, though Johnson would require several weeks of hospitalization and rehabilitation before returning to active duty. As the wounded soldiers were loaded onto the medical helicopters, Maria's three-person team arrived from their defensive position to rejoin the main group. They had continued providing covering fire throughout the entire engagement, expending all of their ammunition to support the rescue mission and subsequent counterattack. Their sustained efforts had been crucial to the overall success of the operation. The intelligence gathered from the abandoned insurgent positions revealed that the enemy force had been planning this ambush for over 2 weeks, carefully studying American patrol patterns and preparing defensive positions throughout the village. The operation had been intended to eliminate an entire American squad and capture their weapons and equipment for use in future attacks. Maria's decisive actions had not only saved her immediate team but also prevented the insurgents from achieving a significant propaganda victory that they had planned to use for recruitment and fundraising purposes. The enemy's careful planning had been completely disrupted by one soldier's refusal to abandon her comrades when the situation seemed hopeless. The formal military investigation of the engagement praised Maria's tactical decision-making, marksmanship, and leadership under extreme pressure. Her willingness to leave a secure defensive position to rescue trapped comrades demonstrated the highest traditions of military service and personal courage. The investigation also noted that her counterattack had been brilliantly conceived and executed. Captain Mitchell's detailed after-action report emphasized that Maria's actions had been the decisive factor in transforming a potential disaster into a successful mission. He specifically recommended her for the highest possible military decorations, noting that her courage had been witnessed by multiple soldiers and had clear, measurable impact on the engagement's outcome. 3 months later, Maria stood in dress uniform at a ceremony attended by senior military leadership, her family and the soldiers whose lives she had saved. The Medal of Honor was presented in recognition of her conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty during combat operations against an armed enemy force. The citation read at the ceremony described how Sergeant Maria Santos had voluntarily exposed herself to intense enemy fire to rescue her commanding officer and fellow soldiers, then led a counterattack that neutralized a superior enemy force and prevented American casualties. Her actions exemplified the finest traditions of military service and reflected great credit upon herself and the United States Army. Private Johnson, now fully recovered from his wounds, attended the ceremony along with Sergeant Williams and Corporal Peterson. They had all submitted written statements describing Maria's heroism and the impact her actions had on their survival. Captain Mitchell, now promoted to major, had the honor of introducing Maria before the medal presentation. Maria's hometown in Texas declared a celebration day in her honor, and her former high school retired her basketball jersey number in recognition of her military service. Local newspapers featured stories about how a small-town girl had become a national hero through her courage and dedication to her fellow soldiers. The engagement in that remote Afghan village became a case study at military academies, analyzed by future officers as an example of small unit tactics, individual initiative, and the importance of aggressive action when facing overwhelming odds. Maria's decision to launch a counterattack rather than remain defensive became a textbook example of battlefield leadership. Years later, when Maria retired from the Army as a sergeant major, she reflected on that morning in Afghanistan as the moment that defined not only her military career, but her understanding of what it truly meant to serve others. The rescue mission had lasted only hours, but its impact resonated through decades of continued service to her country and her fellow soldiers. Her story inspired countless young people to consider military service, showing them that heroism was not about seeking glory, but about making the right choice when faced with impossible circumstances. Maria Santos had secured her place in military history, not through planning or ambition, but through the simple decision to never leave a fellow soldier behind.